you.
Thank you. So we are moving to the English class now. And thank you so much for joining us for today. Once again, I want to remind you that we have prepared wonderful materials for you, and also a movie about the life of Diana Apcar, which you can find on Learnings on our classroom platform. Please do not miss this chance, because we have just few hours left yeah, to be able to watch the movie. And this is a wonderful movie, as many of our participants said earlier, even the movie that you would like to watch for several times. So we have a wonderful guest today, Mimi Malayan. And just let me introduce her to you. Mimi Malayan was born in San Francisco. She received a Bachelor degree of Arts from George Washington University in French language and literature, and a Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of California at Berkeley. For 20 years, Mimi was practicing landscape architect in the San Francisco Bay Area, focusing her professional career on urban parks, plazas, and playground design. In 2002, while cleaning her uncle's apartment, Mimi discovered a box of papers and books by Diana Apcar. This was the seed of unraveling another interest, uncovering her great-granddaughter's life story. It was almost a decade later that Mimi started researching Diana's life and accomplishments. The more she investigated, the more awestruck she became. The result of this work is the film, The Stateless Diplomat, which released in November 2018. Over the past year, Mimi has shown her film at several film festivals, and it has several awards, including Armin Wagner Humanitarian Award at ARPA International Film Festival 2019, Best Biographical Film, New Hope Film Festival, July 2019, and Audience Choice for the Best Documentary at Pomegranate Film Festival in November 2018. Thank you, Ms. Malayan, for being here for this evening, for this session.
Thank you for having me, Marina. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and very grateful to everyone who's worked on this to make this event happen. So thank you. So the title of my presentation is Diana Apcar's Heroic Life, the Early Years. Expectations for Diana Apcar, née Guyane, born October 17, 1859 in Rangoon, British India, were simple. She would marry and become a mother. But from very early on, Diana subtly challenged societal norms for a young woman of the Victorian era. She was an avid reader, insisted on learning Armenian, having grown up speaking English, wanted an education, and loved writing. Her first novel, Susan, presumed in large part to be autobiographical, provides insight into 19th century life for a young Armenian Indian woman and the struggle to find one's path. Susan reveals her ambitions and the tension they generate for her mother. Quote, "If you were a stepchild, you could not be more at variance with me," her mother would say in a burst of indignation. And Susan would walk away to her own room and perhaps shed a few tears in secret. Thinking of herself as homely growing up, she felt herself apart from the norm. Yet at 22, she was considered, quote, "a most charming woman, in whom a man might find a good talker and a good listener to ever so many varied subjects." Susan did not consider herself a clever woman, as she had studied neither metaphysics nor pneumatics, nor many branches of human learning. But her love of reading included collections of books, of poetry and history, essays, biographies, novels, magazines, and reviews. At a young age, Diana's family moved to Calcutta, India, where the Armenian community flourished, with schools and hospitals founded by wealthy merchants, which were available free of charge. But Diana was not satisfied with her privilege. She was disturbed by injustice in the world and searched for meaning in her life. Diana attended convent school and knew the Bible and its messages thoroughly, referencing it constantly to find answers with her Armenian and English Bibles, which she read together to make comparisons of the translations. Her marriage. There's no question that Diana was pressured to marry as a young woman and that she resisted her mother's wish in order to focus on her writing. However, given her mother's early death in 1882, I believe that marriage offered Diana more independence than the life of an old maid under a sibling's roof. Michael Apcar supported Diana's writing, and in 1892, he had her first book, Susan, published, written several years earlier. On June 12, 1889, the couple married at St. John the Baptist Armenian Church in Rangoon. A year later, their first child, Rose, née Sirvart, was born. And before the end of 1890, the trio moved to Japan. Japan had been closed to the world for hundreds of years. However, the Meiji era transformed Japan from isolation to a westernized society. Modern industry was being developed, and with it, the need for trade. Foreigners were encouraged to participate in Japan's modernization. Additionally, Michael's cousins and distant relatives had long been involved in trade, starting in the early 1800s, from Bombay to Singapore to Hong Kong, establishing Apcar and Company and the Apcar line. The young entrepreneur, Michael Apcar, following a family tradition, seized the opportunity to move to Japan. Michael had a cousin in Hong Kong with whom he partnered. Unfortunately, according to an article discovered by Dr. Melanie Mesropian and printed on October 21st, 1891, in the Japanese newspaper Mainichi Shuban, entitled The Apcar Company Case, Michael Apcar became responsible for his cousin's debts after he died suddenly. The result was the confiscation of A.M. Apcar's property. While Diana was giving birth to her first son, Michael, creditors repossessed their belongings. Over 7 years, from 1890 to 1897, Diana gave birth to 5 children: Rose, Michael, John Alchabeg, Ruth, née Zumruth, and John Apcar. Both sons, named John, died, leaving her with 2 girls and 1 boy. The pain of her sons' deaths is expressed in Diana's second book, Home Stories of the War, a collection of 7 short stories about the Russo-Japanese War, published in 1905 and dedicated to the Japanese people. Diana admired the Japanese, their courage, sense of patriotism, and willingness to sacrifice. Here is an excerpt. Throughout the night, she sat on folded knees on a tatami, her faithful servant a few paces away. Once a long, anguished cry escaped her, and the faithful servant shivered and shook. But the next day, she could meet sympathizing friends with a smile, and to their expressions of regret, reply that her son had died for his country, and she was thankful he had died with success. These are virtues that Diana possessed, and which she attributed to both the Japanese and Armenian peoples. Diana was married for 17 years when, in November 1906, her husband suddenly died. She had experienced many difficulties during that marriage, relocating away from her family to a foreign land, losing 2 children, and undergoing 2 bankruptcies. But this was the biggest blow. Michael had been on a business trip to Kobe when a frightened horse kicked him in the head. After recovering from the initial blow, he suddenly died 2 days later, most likely from an aneurysm. The business. Michael's death pushed Diana into a new role, that of businesswoman. In 1906, the business had not been faring well and funds were limited, forcing Diana's son, Michael, just 15 years old, to drop out of school as the family could not afford the tuition to St. Joseph's College. Diana took charge of AM Apcar and Company, importers and exporters, with her son as her assistant. Within a few years, Diana succeeded in stabilizing the business, allowing her to pass on more responsibility to her son. In time, the business became quite successful and afforded Diana and subsequent generation a comfortable living. The Armenian question, also known as Diana's calling and nervous breakdown. In April 1909, approximately 30,000 Armenians were killed during a wave of Turkic nationalism and religious fervor in and around Adana in southwestern Anatolia. Diana was appalled and horrified by the news, motivating her to focus her energy toward Armenia and its people. This became a turning point in her life. Her numerous subsequent writings almost exclusively addressed the Armenian question, namely, what protections and freedoms would be afforded the Armenians as the subjects of the declining Ottoman Empire. The business was doing well, and Michael, at 18, was able to take on the lion's share of the operation. And so Diana, wanting to do whatever she could about the events transpiring half a world away, began networking, attending lectures, and holding regular salon gatherings in her home with the leaders of the Yokohama foreign community and visiting dignitaries. 100 years before the emergence of social media, Diana created an extensive network of connections, which would continue to grow over the following decade. She had regular correspondence with Dr. Charles Albert Goba, Secretary of the International Peace Bureau and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and Dr. David Starr Jordan, President and founder of Stanford University, and somewhat less frequent correspondence with numerous others. Diana's letter dated September 7th, 1910 to Dr. David Starr Jordan, president of Stanford University, states, I am sure the Armenian question has been discussed at the Peace Congress, for I have had assurance from Dr. Albert Goba and Dr. Theodore Rusin that they would bring it forward, and I am sure you must have seized the opportunity. Her concern for Armenia and its people never stops. On January 10th, 1912, she writes to Jordan, we all know that Constantinople government is secretly preparing another Armenian massacre. They may be defeated by the Allied states, but that will not prevent them from being revenged on the Armenians unless they are prevented from doing so. She continues, I know from the return receipt that our appeal was received at The Hague on December 5th, but we have heard nothing as yet. A few days later, on the 17th, she writes, the Armenian question would have found its solution years ago if we did not have behind our country the government of the Tsar, which since 1881 has wanted an Armenia without Armenians. We are now working for the realization of a prefect, that is, a joint American and British protection in Armenia with Swiss governors. I am very much struck by your quotation from Ulrich von Hutten, because the same thought is in my own mind and the same feeling in mine own heart. There can never be peace between the robber and the robbed until stolen goods are returned. Diana wrote books at a feverish pace. In 1910, she published 2 works, The Truth About the Armenian Massacres and Betrayed Armenia. The Turks are not the only ones she blames. Diana sees evil in the great powers of Europe, which turn a blind eye to the atrocities of the Ottoman Empire. Diana writes, wanton butchery of a people is murder. To strengthen and hold up the hand of the murderer is murder. To supply the murderer with death-dealing instruments is murder. Diana's commitment to the Armenian cause far exceeded an intellectual or patriotic motivation to defend her countrymen. She is on a mission ordained by God. Her 1911 publication, In His Name, describes her vision that defined her path. As I prayed, there stood beside me, as in a vision, one the strength of whose presence penetrated into the marrow of my bones. He led me by the hand into a valley with furrows of human blood, and there lay strewn blackened ashes of human flesh and charred bones of the dead, and a voice as of much crying and moaning pierced out of the earth. I fell on my face with fear and trembling, but he that had led me by the hand lifted me and said unto me, Write, what these shall speak unto thee. And I said, Sir, what shall I write? For these are but dead men's bones, and the dead speak not, their mouths are covered with dust. And he said, Nay, but I shall make them stand up in the living flesh, and I shall give them a tongue wherewith they shall speak. And the bones gathered, and I saw rising before me a great multitude, young and old, of men and women, of youths and maidens, and children and babes. And as I looked into their faces, I was pierced to the heart, for I saw in them the faces of my people. And once more in fear and trembling I fell to the earth. But he that held my hand said, Lift up thy head, my strength is sufficient for thee. And I lifted up my head, and he that held my hand loosened his hold, and lo, a pen was in my hand, and a scroll in my lap. And the light from his presence shone upon the scroll and tipped the pen with fire, and I felt the strength of his presence around me. And once more he spake, commanding mightily, Daughter of thy people, write what the slain of thy people shall speak unto thee. Diana's calling emboldened her. She was determined to do whatever she could to draw attention to the plight of the Armenians. She wrote 3 more books, The Peace Problem, Peace and No Peace, and The Great Evil, arguing for self-determination and an independent Armenia. Armenians would thrive if allowed to govern themselves, but they were merely pawns in the game of imperialism. In Peace, No Peace, she writes, the great powers of Europe treat the small nations as billiard players treat the balls on a billiard table. They strike the helpless balls of all of the small nations with their political cues and the balls have to go rolling here and there at the stroke of the players. From 1909 to 1914, Diana pushed herself beyond all reasonable expectations. She wrote and published 6 books, about 30 articles, and maintained extensive correspondence, writing to any and all who might listen. Every time she learned of someone interested in the cause, she would mail him one of her books with a letter apologizing for writing without a proper introduction. No stone was to be left unturned. By 1914, exhausted and frustrated, seeing the start of World War I and convinced of the imminent danger facing Armenians, Diana collapsed from a nervous breakdown, proclaiming that, quote, her faith had trembled. Humanitarian work. Diana's effort to prevent the atrocities in Anatolia were in vain. The Armenian genocide of 1915 surpassed her worst predictions. 1.5 million people were killed. Hundreds of thousands of survivors fled in all directions, including east and north to the Caucasus. Some of them continued north to Russia, only to find that country embroiled in the bloody Bolshevik Revolution. The genocide survivors could not go home and could not go west to Europe into the heart of World War I. So they chose an unexpected direction, east across Siberia, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, a 10,000-kilometer journey. As there were no ships to take them to America from the Russian city port of Vladivostok, refugees first needed to get to Japan. According to Dr. Melanie Mesropian, a Diana Apcar scholar in Japan, during World War I, the refugee status problem had drawn the world's attention for the first time, but it had not yet determined internationally, which meant that refugees all around the world, including those in Japan, were facing various problems. In other words, without passports or an identification card with an entry visa stamped by a Japanese consul and sufficient funds, poor refugees were stopped by the authorities. Ms. Ropian continues, Diana influenced the Japanese foreign minister to accept passports issued by the Armenian Committee and give the Armenians entry certificates to pass through Japan. Diana presented the foreign minister with a certificate assuring her financial support to those refugees who did not have the required money to enter Japan. We understand from letters and documents that the Japanese Foreign Ministry accepted Diana as a guardian of the Armenian refugees. End quote. Just take a... Diana's participation was essential in assisting Armenian refugees transiting through Japan. The outcome for these refugees would have been completely different without her. Not having passports or proper travel documents, the refugees would not have reached Japan and would have remained in Vladivostok or Harbin, not accomplishing their ultimate goal of reaching the United States. In addition to coordinating the refugees' entry into Japan, Diana also coordinated their exit. She searched for sponsors and relatives in the United States. She wrote to the Secretary of State, Robert Lansing, begging that the refugees might be provided entry into the United States. Once they did obtain approval, Diana arranged their travel from Yokohama to San Francisco and Seattle, primarily. This all took several months, during which time, using her own resources, Diana rented houses and hotel rooms in Yokohama to shelter the refugees. She found them jobs and enrolled their children in school. Between 1917 and 1919, the American Red Cross ran camps in Russia to aid the millions of refugees fleeing World War I. The largest of these camps was in Vladivostok. Next in size was in Harbin, Manchuria. Diana became the Japanese representative for the Armenians at the American Red Cross camps. Waves of 60 to 70 Armenian refugees would come to Yokohama at a time as the scope of Diana's work expanded. One of her biggest struggles was gaining ship passage, as steamship companies were booked beyond capacity for months ahead, given that many vessels had been reassigned to serve in the war. For years prior to the establishment of the First Republic of Armenia, and for years after its dissolution, Diana truly was acting as the de facto ambassador of the lost nation of Armenia, single-handedly aiding her countrymen. In trying to understand the number of refugees aided by Diana, I reviewed ship manifests and U.S. immigration documents and was able to identify approximately 600 Armenians who traveled from Yokohama to either San Francisco or Seattle over a 10-year period between 1916 and 1926. However, Dr. Melanie Mesropian found a 1920 newspaper article published in Japan, which claimed that Diana had supported 2,500 people up to that point in time. Her appointment as honorary consul. On July 22nd, 1920, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hamo Ohanjanyan, wrote to Diana appointing her as honorary consul of Armenia in Japan, quote, for defending the interests of the newly born fatherland and mitigating the conditions of our compatriots, end quote. She accepted the position, but before Japan could recognize her new status, the First Republic of Armenia was absorbed by what would become the Soviet Union. Diana's appointment as honorary consul lasted only a few months, yet this is how she is remembered. The truth is that Diana Aghabek Apcar committed a majority of her life to defend and protect her country and her people. On September 1st, 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake claimed over 100,000 lives in Japan. Diana's house collapsed with her inside, but she survived with barely a scratch. For the remainder of the decade, she continued to work with refugees and the underprivileged until she was unable due to health and age. In 1929, her oldest daughter, Rose, with her husband and 3 children, moved to San Francisco. Diana remained in Yokohama with her son, Michael, and his family, as well as her youngest daughter, Ruth. Diana died on July 8th, 1937, at the age of 77. She is buried in Yokohama.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. And let's pass to the questions.
Yes.
Dear participants, please ask your questions.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, yes.
Hi.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation and also for your wonderful film, which I haven't quite finished watching. I wanted to ask you about your use of animation, which I think is very, very effective and really quite striking, especially the way in which it doesn't just start out existing, but we see it drawn and we see it go away. And I just wondered if you could talk about that. And I just wanted to say it reminded me slightly of Persepolis, which I think is also a wonderful and rare black and white animation. If you say black and white animation, people will say, well, ugh, that doesn't sound very interesting. I wondered if that was an influence possibly.
It certainly was a reference. The main reason for the animation is that a film, of course, is a visual medium, and I have a handful of photographs, you know, maybe a dozen at most. And so in order to communicate Diana's story, there needed to be another way of communicating it. I mean, there's very, very little footage, film footage from that time. And so my co-director, Artur Muradian, came up with the idea of animation. So the drawings are all line drawings produced in Photoshop. And so it's a simple form. It's a simple process. Well, simple compared to conventional animation. So the different parts of each drawing are drawn on different layers, and then the animator takes that and animates it. So also, because the film tells very personal stories about Diana, as well as Krikor Yehoyan, who's Krikor is the refugee story that I used his memoir to tell the story of the refugees who traveled to Japan. There needed a way to communicate the personal stories that interviewees were unaware of. And so that was the reason for the animation, to tell, and yeah, to be able to communicate things that went beyond the scholars I spoke to, because there was a lot of personal information that nobody knew except me. So that's how that came about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have a question, if I can read. So how long did it take you to research and to begin working on the film? And did you travel to India or Japan?
So the film took a very long period of time. I worked on it on and off for 8 years. It would start, it would stop, I would do research, I would find somebody to assist with a certain part of it. It was, yes, it was a long project. It wasn't, I'm not a filmmaker per se, and I would take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and it evolved. So it was a long process. I did travel to India, but as a child, not for this film. For the film, the most of the interviews were done while there were 4 interviews in Japan, for example. Those were done via Skype, where I would hire a local videographer to film the interview, and then I would conduct the interview via Skype from San Francisco. So I did not travel for the film. But when I was a child, my father took jobs overseas, and we actually lived in Bangladesh for 2 years, and in Pakistan, and we traveled through India. So I have some I did experience the subcontinent a very long time ago. So
Thank you, thank you. One question, if I can ask, I want to ask about Rose and Michael. What did they do later? Did they continue somehow her path? Did they were they in contact with these people whom the long list? Yeah, almost 2,500 people.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about them?
Well, Michael and his family stayed in Japan, as I said, and then unfortunately they were there during World War II. So they suffered quite significantly. Michael was imprisoned, and when he came to the U.S. After the war, he was a broken man. He was not able to fully function very well. So he certainly was not able to pursue Diana's interest. Rose was, and her husband, Samuel Galston, were very, very involved in the Armenian community here in San Francisco, and were the founding. There was no Armenian church when they came here, and they worked diligently and contributed funds toward establishing St. John Armenian Apostolic Church here in San Francisco. And in fact, Rose was given the honor of naming the church, and she named it John after her brothers who died. So in that sense, I suppose that's a bit of Diana's legacy. I remember, I can tell you one story when I was about 8 years old, living in my grandmother's house. One day I was looking out the window, and this would have been 1959, 1960, something like that. And a big black Cadillac pulled up in front of the house, and this was a very big event. And I went running downstairs telling my mother, "Look at this big black Cadillac in front of the house. Who is this?" Anyway, the man got out of the car, came up the stairs, and rang the doorbell. And my mother answered the door, and I remember standing next to her. And the man on the other side said, "Do you remember me?" And my mother looked, and she said, "Hamaik." She had recognized him. He was a young boy, the same age as my mother, and the son of a refugee. And as a child, the children played together during the months that he and his mother were in Japan. And he had come from Los Angeles up to San Francisco to visit, to say thank you, to respect Rose. So yeah, I remember that story. It was, yeah, it was a very heartwarming experience for them both my mother and Rose. So yeah, anyway. And it's funny, I will say that he and his mother, my mother would talk about the refugees. There were some who had a little bit of money, and others who, you know, didn't have a penny. And, you know, he and his mother were the most desperate. And they came to Los Angeles, and then she married a man who was very successful, and they were very well off. And yeah, it was very rewarding to meet him for them. So
thank you. Another question clarification we have from participants. So the grandchildren in the film are the children of Rose.
No, Michael Apcar is the son of, that name, Michael, just goes to every generation, and it's very confusing. But the two grandchildren in the film are my mother, the daughter of Rose, and then Michael, the son of Michael. Yes, so they're first cousins, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions, please?
I have a question, if I may. There is a park in Yerevan that is named after Diana Apcar. And it was named, as I understand, after screening the movie at the Golden Apricot Festival. I want to know what was your role in organizing that, and do you have further plans maybe related to the park?
So I have to give credit to Gaine Melkomian of the Yerevan City Council, this was her initiative, and she promoted this renaming of the park. I believe she came to a screening that I had last year in Yerevan of the film. And then she wrote to me and she suggested that the park be dedicated on Diana's birthday in October. And so that was when they made the official name change. My only role was Guyane had written a proposal to the city council, and I reviewed it slightly and made a couple comments. The main contributor, I will say, to a lot of the factual information in her presentation to the city council to gain that name change was Melanie Mesropian. She made certain contribution there. But no, there was supposed to be a dedication this July because it's the 100th anniversary of the First Republic, and I mean of Diana's appointment actually, and so, but because of the coronavirus epidemic, that I'm not sure what's happening with the dedication. There was supposed to be a plaque that's presented, etc. So that may happen at a later time. I would like to have a statue of Diana in the park, and I, in fact, want to start soliciting family and friends to see if there are people want to make contributions to this. But yes, I would, and I need to ask whatever the process is in Yerevan to have this accomplished. But that is something I would like to do because, well, first of all, I don't think that there are other women who are recognized in this way with a street name or statue or park name. And I think it's very important that Armenia recognize significant women in their history.
Thank you.
So.
I think it is a good beginning for starting recognizing the role of Armenian women. Yeah, in the independence, in strengthening our country, etc.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
We have another question from Cassian. Yes, please. So Hasmik is asking. She knows that Melina is working on that on the stuff, and is it going to be continued? And can they wait for a new publications? Yes, Hasmik, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, Hasmi, it's lovely to see you here.
Great to
So
see.
thank you for joining the conversation.
I wouldn't have missed it.
Melanie completed her PhD 1 year ago on Japan and its response to World War I refugees, with a case study on Diana Apcar and the Armenians. The PhD is, because she's in Japan at a Japanese university, of course, it's all in Japanese. However, a publisher in Japan has now requested that she convert the PhD into a book, and that is in progress. But again, so the publication will probably come out shortly, but it again is in Japanese. So the quotes I have are just from my email communications with her, where she's taken bits from her research and just translated it into English for me. I really hope that it will be translated both into Armenian and English so that her research can be shared. I could not have completed this project effectively without her input, because I could not research Japanese archives, and she's discovered things that certainly nobody knew. So yeah, I'm so grateful to Melanie, and I hope that she's able to pursue her line of work more extensively. So.
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks so much.
What are the following plans about the screening of the movie, Miss Malayan? Are you going to continue with the screening in different parts of the world? What are your plans? After the coronavirus, of course.
I was in fact supposed to be in Japan at this very moment. The university in Yokohama invited me to, along with Melanie, to show the film and have a Diana Apcar seminar. And of course it was canceled, but hopefully that will, once the world is able to deal with medical issues, etc., that will happen. We'll see. Perhaps that could happen online. I haven't pursued that. Yes, I mean, my biggest, I want people to know about Diana. So that's the purpose of the film, is to just give people an introduction to her life and her accomplishments, not just as an Armenian woman, as a woman, as just her contribution to the world is significant as an individual. And to me, she exceeds all normal expectations for any lifetime, and I want her to be recognized and applauded for her accomplishments. So, but yes, I tried different venues. If anyone's interested, they just need to send me an email, and I'm open to all screenings.
Miss Malayan. So Zepure shared her thoughts about the movie. She watched the movie 3 times, and also, yeah, as just a woman, as the person who is going to present, and it's, you know, a great responsibility to present such a wonderful topic. And once she just as a documentary, once she was watched as the life of Diana Apcar, and the third time was the emotional angle, yeah, of the movie. And the question is, she was such a, I don't know, perfect person. Who was her ideal? Her someone whom she was
A role
Your
model.
role model.
yeah, role model, yeah, for her.
Well, she was a very religious person. So I would say that she found her strength through prayer. And my mother, in fact, would talk about every morning at 10 o'clock, she went to her room, and for an hour, she would say her prayers, sing hymns from the Badarak. That was what gave her strength and purpose and guided her. So while in Susan, she says that her mother saw her as a Christian, but in not a conventional way, because she didn't always adhere to the church dogma, but she was absolutely clear in her own mind about right and wrong. And so I don't know, that's the best answer I can come up with. I can't say that I can think of an individual whom she admired or mentored, but it was definitely her faith is what guided her.
So my question, Mimi, is that around this time, women were extensively organizing internationally for peacemaking in the world. Major organizations were functioning, especially in the United States, working with President Wilson, who eventually, founded the League of Nations, initiated by women, that later had to become the United Nations after World War II. I was wondering if you ever found in her letters any mention of the peace activity that was so extensively going around the world. And I'm also curious to know if she was ever in touch with the 3 women that were elected to the parliament, to the National Assembly, the parliament in the Republic of Armenia, because there's very little known about these 3 women. We know they were elected, but there's very little information. I'm wondering if her letters and the memoirs that she's left behind could be a source also for that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. On the list of correspondence, you'll see that Diana contacted practically every peace organization of any prominence. She even writes, I am a peace worker, and that her goal is this is her goal. And so she finds support through other peace organizations. And in those organizations, there were women whom she was in contact with. Baroness von Suttner, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, was one of her correspondents. There were, Dr. Charles Albergoba was also a Nobel Peace Prize winner. She does mention, as far as women goes, she says, we would have no more wars if women were in positions of authority. But there is actually very little that I found that is my main resource. Was her correspondence with David Starr Jordan. And the reason why I was able to access those letters is because as president of Stanford University, his archive is at that university, and I was able to go there and retrieve those documents. These other correspondence, I actually have very few copies of letters to and from them. Because I had access to the three main archives: the David Starr Jordan archive at Stanford, the American Red Cross in Vladivostok archive, and then the archive, the UN archive in Geneva. And so otherwise, everything from Japan was destroyed in the earthquake. There are a lot of holes still. The way I was able to develop this list of correspondence is that she references them in other letters to, for example, David Starr Jordan. So while I believe she was very supportive of the women's movement, she did write a letter, for example, I know, or she mentions Belva Ann Bennett Lockwood, who was an attorney and American suffragette. And there is that one comment that she makes. So I can't say that she was a suffragette per se, but she certainly supported the women's movement. I would say that. As far as correspondence with the Armenian parliament, I really have no idea. There may be something in Armenia. I don't know if there's an archive that, because she did write, well, she certainly wrote to Etchmiadzin. I'm not sure about the Armenian parliament. But also you have to be aware that her appointment was so short. The letter is written July 22nd in 1920. She probably received the letters several weeks later. And by the end of November, December, the First Republic was dissolving. So, Japan had still not recognized her appointment. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It would be fascinating if you could find something with her connection to other women, Armenian women, or I mean any Zabel Yeseyan, but I'm unaware of it.
Alejandro?
Thank you for your presentation and the film. They are very moving stories that should be known by everybody. My question is this. After the disappearance of the First Armenian Republic and all the consequences that it has for her hopes and expectations, what was she expecting for the future of the Armenian people? What was her vision of the future?
Wow. I don't know how to answer that. I'm sure seeing the First Republic was just a moment in her life that was rewarding and satisfying and gave her hope. But yeah, you know, the last scene in the film, I don't know, have you seen the film? So in the last scene, there is this animation where there are refugees at her dinner table, and they toast to a free Armenia, basically. And that 95% of the text in the film is taken from Diana's writings, but that scene is fabricated. That scene it just came out of my imagination, and it's because the film needed a conclusion, and I couldn't. All I can say is, you know, I think she would be very happy today. I can say that. But in her lifetime, she didn't see that conclusion. So, but yes, I think she would be very proud of what has, how Armenia has become and continues to move forward in such a positive direction. So, yeah. I'm sorry, I guess I can answer better.
Thank you, thank you.
Another comment and question altogether. I also thought about that, so I'm citing. I'm amazed that she got responses from all the highly positioned folks, mostly men, that she wrote to regarding the Armenian horrors and struggles. She seems to have had some high status with her husband's business initially. Nowadays, I expect such letters would never get response. Yeah, that's very interesting that almost everyone, right, responded to her. How that happened, how she could write them, and her letters always get them.
You know, I don't know. She commanded respect, and there was a family story that I heard. I mean, I have nothing to base it on, but when she entered a room, the Japanese men would stand to respect her. Now, that was not especially 100 years ago, women had a very different role in, around the world, but also a very strict position in Japanese society. And that's certainly, you know, not something that was normal behavior. So people took her seriously, and she, as I said, she was on a mission, so nothing was going to dissuade her. And she could use her books as a way of making that introduction. You know, she would mail a book to someone and say, I apologize for being, for not having an introduction, but I would like to share this book with you. And if you could give me your comments, you know, or what are your thoughts on this topic? Or I've read your article about this and I'd like to share my ideas with you. And so this was how she made those connections to people. And people responded. Some, you know, I'm sure there were plenty who never wrote back, but that wasn't going to discourage her from trying. So.
Thank you. We have an interesting comment from our student. Sorry if I missed this. How can we help spread word about the gorgeous and expensive film?
How can we spread word about Diana?
About the film. About the film.
Oh, well, I have a Facebook page, and if there's an organization or a group that wants a screening, you know, they just need to contact me. So, I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. And thank you so much, Ms. Malayan, for this wonderful evening, morning for most of the people. So the best beginning of the day with you. And once again, I want to remind you that we have 2 more days to watch the movie. Yeah, on the Learning Zone classroom. Please do not miss your chance and go to the course page, and you will find there not only the movie but also interesting materials about Diana, her documentaries, letters, pieces of letters there. So yeah,
Well, I want to thank you, Marina. You've been wonderful. We've been in contact over the last 2 weeks, and you've coordinated this event, and you've always been so helpful, and everyone who's worked with you, I'm very grateful for all you have done. So
thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. It was a great honor for me, believe me, working with you and communicating with you. I got a great pleasure. So do please, everyone, if you cannot, just in order to get to the Learning Zone, please go to our website, Armenian Virtual College, sign up, and you will see the free course and see all the materials. And also I want to announce another topic that is going to be to happen next Saturday here at the same hour, 8 o'clock Armenian class and 9 o'clock English class. We're going to talk about Armenian national dances, about the history of Armenian national dances, the difference of ethnographic dances and national dances, and much more. So do not miss our sessions. We are here waiting for you. It's always a pleasure to see you all here. Thank you so much, and see you soon. Love you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you soon. Shonaraku.
Arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you all. Great job. Thanks, Mimi. I appreciate all your help here.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the attendees for the great questions, and the ABC team who interpreted so well. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you next Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
All righty.
Ms. Malayan, we definitely, there's an organization in Minnesota, the Armenian Cultural Organization of Minnesota, and we would love to have your film and maybe Zoom with you. It would be just wonderful. We have a little mini Armenian film series.
My email address is mimimalayan@gmail.com.
Oh, so very easy.
mimimalayan@gmail.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.